Hey there, YouTube fam. Welcome to our channel. But before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of our exciting content. Now let's jump right into today's video.
Boys tend to have higher muscle mass. Girls generally have a higher body fat percentage. Boys typically have deeper voices. Girls often have higher pitched voices. Boys generally have more facial hair. Girls usually have less facial hair. Boys tend to be more physically active. Girls often engage more in social activities. Boys typically have a higher metabolic rate. Girls generally have a lower metabolic rate. Boys usually have shorter haircuts. Girls often have longer hair. Boys often prefer competitive sports. Girls often prefer team sports. Boys tend to be more prone to aggression. Girls typically exhibit more empathy. Boys generally have a higher risk of autism. Girls generally have a lower risk of autism. Boys are more likely to be colorblind. Girls have a lower likelihood of being colorblind. Boys typically have broader shoulders. Girls often have wider hips. Boys generally have a higher risk of ADHD. Girls generally have a lower risk of ADHD. Boys often have a higher tolerance for pain. Girls tend to have a lower pain threshold. Boys usually have a higher rate of baldness. Girls typically have a lower rate of baldness. Boys generally have a faster growth rate during puberty. Girls typically have a longer growth period during puberty. Boys often have a stronger sense of direction. Girls often have a better sense of object location. Boys tend to be more risk-taking. Girls often display cautious behavior. Boys typically have a higher rate of dyslexia. Girls generally have a lower rate of dyslexia. Boys generally have a higher risk of learning disabilities. Girls generally have a lower risk of learning disabilities. Boys usually have a higher basal metabolic rate. Girls typically have a lower basal metabolic rate. Boys tend to have larger hands. Girls often have smaller hands. Boys generally have a higher rate of color vision deficiency. Girls typically have a lower rate of color vision deficiency. Boys often have a higher risk of stuttering. Girls generally have a lower risk of stuttering. Boys tend to have a higher risk of autism spectrum disorders. Girls generally have a lower risk of autism spectrum disorders. Boys typically have a higher risk of speech disorders. Girls generally have a lower risk of speech disorders. Boys often engage in more physical fights. Girls usually engage in verbal conflicts. Boys generally have a higher rate of ADHD diagnosis. Girls generally have a lower rate of ADHD diagnosis.